Narrative violation. Trigger warning. Engaged. You've been warned. Trigger warning. Okay, we're going to talk about Facebook today. They just announced fully encrypted backups of WhatsApp. Now, they've had fully encrypted end-to-end messaging on WhatsApp since 2016, and they single-handedly, more than any other company in the world, provide private, secure messaging to more people than any other company in the world, full stop. Over 2 billion users, 100 billion messages a day, fully encrypted, private, secure. Facebook doesn't get enough credit for this. Apple doesn't get enough doggery for working with a Chinese state-run cloud company to host iCloud data, including iMessages, with the encryption keys in the hands of the Chinese government. No one talks about that, and no one talks about this. Facebook deserves a lot of credit for implementing the Signal protocol. So what they announced was they've always had backups, but now they have fully encrypted backups. So if you back up on iOS or Android, it's iCloud and Google. I think it's called Google Drive. What is it? I think it's Google Drive associated with the Google account. It used to be unencrypted, so Apple and Google had access to your messages. Now it's fully encrypted, so not even when you store it can your messages be read. Encryption is magic. It's a beautiful tool, and it's the reason that we can do what we do on the internet today securely and privately. So much of what we do. Boom. That's the hot take. Okay, so let's get into some of the details. I always like just doing a quick rundown. So, by the way, this is Dick Lucas, host of the No Gradient podcast. You can get this podcast wherever podcasts are available, and just search No Gradient wherever you get your podcasts. On YouTube, there's always a link to the YouTube channel in the show notes. Finding us on YouTube is me. Search Dick Lucas No Gradient. I don't even know if the channel comes up, but it's a tough look. We're still working on that. Also on Instagram and Twitter, Dick C. Lucas. Reach out to me on Twitter, Instagram, hit me up. Mostly Twitter. Twitter's more fun. Let me know if you want me to cover anything. Also email me, dick@nogradient.com, or just say what up. Leave a comment. Apple Podcasts. I know there's some listeners out there. I'm getting 40 downloads a day consistently when I release a new episode. It's not a day, excuse me. When I release a new episode, about 40 downloads at least. Look at me, big timer. So if you want me to cover something, I'm trying to cover topics quickly as soon as they happen. Let me know. Reach out. That'll be beast. Anyway, let's get into this. So now that housekeeping is done. Okay, so this is I should add that this is an optional feature, and it's a feature that I've actually had disabled on WhatsApp. I'm a heavy user of WhatsApp, Signal, Apple iMessage. What else do I use? Those are the major ones. But I've had WhatsApp messaging backups turned off. And the reason for this is two reasons. Well, I used to have it on, but two reasons. One, I don't want people, and I let people know, listen, if you message me when I get a new phone, boom, messages are wiped clear. I don't store messages for a long time. Same with iMessage. I only store them for a year. I'm no hero. Stop acting like it. But when people message me, listen, I'm not storing everything forever, okay? There's some ephemeral shit here. And the second reason I haven't stored my backups on Google Drive is because they're unencrypted. Google can get access. The government can get access. They subpoena Google. Not that I'm against subpoenas. I think the government should be able to get access to certain information when there's a probable cause, or they get a warrant, et cetera, et cetera. We talk about a lot about that on the show. But no, messaging, that's private. That to me is a fundamental internet citizen right. You don't get to see you don't get to see all the messages I have. And fundamentally, yes, some people use this for bad. But some people also use cars for bad. Some people use a lot of technology for bad. Is that right? For bad, for evil, for bad purposes, for crimes. But this is the trade-off we make in a free society. So, as Apple famously, I just dogged Apple at the beginning, but they held firm against FBI, preventing from creating a backdoor in iPhones to give FBI easy access to them, because there's no guarantee that you create a backdoor. There's no guarantee that only the party that you created the backdoor for will have access to it. You create a backdoor, boom, anyone can get access to that. You have to assume anyone can get access to that. That's why the safest thing is end-to-end encryption, because not even Facebook doesn't even have access to your messages. Now they have access to certain information about your messages. I think they get your profile picture unencrypted, they get your name unencrypted. I think they get who's in the group unencrypted, which is actually more information than Signal gets. The Signal is the most secure, most private, I'd say, just based on the information that they collect and have access to. Signal doesn't even know. They have sealed sender. Signal doesn't even know who sent the message. So when they get a message to their server, they don't even know who sent it. They just know where it's going. It's an incredible, incredible technology. Encryption in general is just unbelievable, unbelievably powerful. It feels like magic. It's really it's a fundamental tech pillar of the way so much of our modern internet lives even is able to operate. Okay, so let's dive into the details here. First of all, I commend WhatsApp for doing this. I commend Facebook for doing this. This is epic. So this is an optional feature. Now you have two things you can do. You can just set a simple password to encrypt your backup. I still don't think I'm going to do it because, again, this goes into the whole every message someone sends me, I don't want, it's a long history forever. But this definitely makes me more likely. You can either use a password or store a 64-bit encryption key. Now, the password, I don't know what the constraints are. I actually, admittedly, haven't played with it yet. But the 64-bit encryption key is not something you'll be able to really memorize. I mean, you could, but it's probably something you're going to store in LastPass or 1Password or probably not on a piece of paper, but maybe piece of paper and in some secure password manager as well. So those are the two options. And let's talk about, so they released a white paper, 10-page white paper. I'll link to it. Easy read. If you're interested in this, easy read. Some of the technical stuff goes over my head, but I always encourage people, dive into primary sources. Don't read the Verge article. Props to the Verge for actually linking to Facebook's post and Facebook's white paper. Don't read the CNET or the Verge or the TechCrunch article about it. Just go see what Facebook is saying. Because they're writing their article based on that blog, but you might as well go straight to the source. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how this works. And I'm by no means an encryption expert. I'm a technologist, though. Okay, so a random key is generated on the device to encrypt everything. So to encrypt all your messages, photos, videos, before it goes up to the cloud, before it goes up to Google or Apple, and the key to encrypt that backup is secured with a user-provided password. Now, we'll talk about the case where if you use as I said, you can use a 64-bit encryption key, but if you use a password, your key is stored in what they call an HSM backup key vault. Now, their backup key vault, the way they explain it, you can think of it like a bank. Well, it's actually safer than this. A bank safety deposit box. You go in there, you have a key, they have a key. They can't get access without you giving them access as well. Of course, they can break it open if shit really hit the fan. In a bank, but this is certainly, now it's not open source, but you got to take it. I take it at face value at this stuff. Companies don't have a history, big tech companies don't have a history of lying about their technical specifications, the technical way they implement things. And I think a lot of the reason they do that, they want to be honest about the way they do things because they want feedback from the community. They want their stuff audited. This is, you create a secure system. Or one way to create a secure system is to get as many eyeballs on it as possible. That's why open source is so powerful. So when they say something's encrypted, when they say I take it at face value, because there's also been, the true test. The true test is when a government subpoenas them. So, the FBI has famously subpoenaed Signal and WhatsApp. Signal has released and said, we don't have anything. We actually don't have access. And Facebook's done a similar thing. I know in India there were a lot of problems with messages being forwarded that were actually causing hangings and people were getting murdered, and Facebook had ways to prevent it a little bit. They could kind of look at metadata about the messages to determine, to try to slow the spread of those types of messages that would cause those things, but then have the messages themselves. So you always don't look at what they say, but when the government comes knocking, do they really have something, or do they not? And so far, Signal and WhatsApp have proved that they actually do not. So the HSM backup key vault is responsible for enforcing password verification attempts. So if you guess the password several times and you're wrong, it will actually after a certain number of attempts, it'll destroy the key, so no one can get access to it. And they do this to avoid brute force attacks, because someone gets access, and if they're really persistent, they could guess a shit ton of passwords, and eventually they might be able to actually crack it, depending on how short the password is. So they have a way to mitigate this, which they'll just destroy the key, which I think is a good security practice. And also, and this is interesting, that they also I think they released this white paper before the Facebook outage. That we talked about or was that last week or a couple weeks ago? But the HSM-based backup key vault service is geographically distributed across multiple data centers, allowing it to continue operating in the event of a data center outage. So what's interesting is, so it sounds like this is a separate system than how their messages are delivered. It's a separate. I wonder if this would have gone down to the Facebook outage, because you can imagine the case where Facebook's down, but Google has my messages, and I have a password, and I want to at least get access to that's not stored on Facebook, that's stored on Google or Apple, stored in their servers. I want to get access to my messages. Now, if Facebook's down, I still want to be able to get access. So I imagine that this backup key vault system will still allow me to get my key. Remember, I give the password, that unlocks the key. I get the key to then decrypt the message, decrypt my messages, videos, and photos coming down from Google and Apple. So I'd be very curious, and I bet this is a standalone system. But that would have been very interesting to see if this was still working during the Facebook outage. I bet they've had some talks about this, and that's I bet it's a completely separate system. Now, one thing I'll mention is if you don't use a password, if you just use that 64-bit encryption key, like I talked about, you actually don't use this HSM-based backup key vault at all. They don't even store your key. Your key, that is your key. That 64-bit encryption key that you have, that is all you need. So you don't store anything with them. So it actually it forces you to. It's harder to store. Probably harder to store a 64-bit encryption key. I mean, it's longer than a password that you'd come up with that maybe you can remember, which. Personally, I don't know any of my passwords. They're all except for one. I use a big fan of password managers. But if you do the 64-bit key route, yeah, it's harder. You probably won't remember it. You'll have to store it, but at least that key is yours, and it never even touches Facebook servers. So that's a very interesting. That's another interesting kind of tidbit that wasn't in the blog post, but that was in the white paper. Now, another thing I want to point out is that this whole security, one of the main things I think it's underrated in secure systems and secure messaging especially is Facebook, Google, these companies that do this, or Signal, they do it just as much to cover their own ass, right? Because if they don't have access to the messages, then you hack Facebook servers. Let's say you get access to their servers. The messages that are going through, they're encrypted. There's nothing you can do with them, right? So it covers. That's why you haven't heard about a leak of WhatsApp messages, or a leak of Signal messages, or a leak of. Really, there hasn't. Some of the big tech companies haven't had really a mass leak of messages, and I've talked about this before. That you don't get credit for something that doesn't happen. I don't think they deserve enough, or they get enough credit for that. But what's also interesting is in this white paper, they mention several times, 5 actually, at least in the case of Apple, they say Apple and Google do not have access to your messages. Apple and Google cannot read your messages. Boom, bam, boom, bam, boom, which I think is, I think they were happy to write that, and they should write it because it's a worthy worry, but it's cool. I just love it. Okay, so just a couple technical things here, and I'll link to the Facebook blog post that. And I'll link to the white paper in the show notes. It's only 10 pages, and it's quadruple spaced margins so it's a quick read. But so at the heart of the key registration and the ability to later securely retrieve is something they call the opaque protocol, which is I think something they developed. So that allows you to actually retrieve your key in a secure manner. Now, I didn't read about that. But it's just something you could look into if you're interested. The client relies on a public key that is associated with a specific HSM-based backup key vault fleet, which is hard-coded into the client. This prevents man-in-the-middle type of attacks. Okay, so this is the last technical thing I want to talk about. So this fleet that, as I said, there's multiple data centers all over the world. I think they said there's 5. It's duplicated 5 times, and one of them can go down, and you can still get your key. Hard coded into the client, hard coded into the app, is a public key that's associated with this fleet of HSM key servers. So it's hard coded. So it's in the client, so that makes it more secure, so that you know that you're talking to the proper server when you go to get your key. So there's not a man in the middle attack. Someone goes between you and the server and retrieves or inserts their own data. Retrieves your data, inserts their own, gives you back, so you think you're talking to the server, but really you're talking to the man in the middle, quote unquote. One more thing I want to talk about that I think is underrated. People think that, generally in this talk of, end-to-end encrypted messaging. And I used to kind of think that, then, no one can read your messages. Besides, they would need physical access to your device to read your messages. Actually wrong. There's that Israeli tech company, security company, whose name escapes me, that they sell tools, what is it, Pegasus or something, that can hack an iPhone remotely without any user intervention. And what that can do is it can access the data that's on the device and retrieve it. So what they're doing is the message is decrypted when it's on your device, right? Or you have to read it, so it has to be decrypted at some point. They can get access to it that way. So there will never security and counters to security will always be at odds with each other. It will never be a solved problem once and for all. I think things are getting better, but there's also getting more sophisticated. Attackers are getting more sophisticated. So now, yes, they're not able to read your message. What they can do is they can access your iPhone. Now, it's unclear whether this is happening in the latest version of iOS 15. It's with the latest iPhones. Certainly, the newer iPhones are more secure than the older iPhones. Every year, they announce some new hardware-based security stuff that is more than just an iOS update. It actually relies on new hardware built into the device. But it's always it's a never-ending thing. It's very interesting. So, and I don't know if this tool. What's interesting is, I think the Pixel device. Granted, it's iPhone. There's how many iPhones are out there? 1 billion, something like that. Billion iPhone users. Bigger attack surface. It's just a bigger target. More people are going to spend time trying to hack that versus Android phones are run across a ton of different manufacturers. So it's just there's not one. Yes, you can compromise Android, absolutely, but there's also device-specific things that certain, like the Pixel line. Samsung has their Fortnite. Well, the Pixel has their Titan M chip, which is also used in their servers, I believe, actually, to secure the device, which is a hardware-specific thing that helps secure the Pixel devices. New Pixel's about to drop, Pixel 6, I think October 19th. That'll be interesting. So, but it's just, it's interesting. So it's a never-ending thing. And Apple hasn't said much on this, that Israeli company I mentioned. I think it's Pegasus. They haven't said much on they haven't really commented on whether their devices are still at risk of this attack. And what's interesting is this company, they sell this, the security company sells this to pre-approved buyers. They're not just going to sell it to North Korea, for example. They're not going to sell it to a country with human rights abuses, because that's just a bad thing to do. But like we talked about earlier with backdoors, if you create something, it will get out. So whether they've sold it specifically to, I think Mexico was using it, which I wouldn't say they have a history of human rights abuses, but I also wouldn't say that they're necessarily the prime example of a country that we should all aspire to be in terms of protecting the civil liberties of their people. But there's some other countries, I forget off the top of my head, but there's some other nefarious groups that have gotten access to this tool, and this company has said, "Oh, we didn't sell it to them," and it's just an interesting thing. You create something, and famously also the NSA had some of their hacking tools that were leaked, and that other people could then use. This is once you create something, the likelihood that it will just get out there is extremely high. So it's an interesting space, interesting problem, and good on Facebook for doing this. More people are going to have greater privacy, especially in countries where this is important, especially in countries where they might not have as much barrier entry to a subpoena to get access to your chat backups. So now, even if they do, boom, there's no recourse. There's nothing they can do. They need to get physical access to your device or use this that Pegasus software I was talking about. Again, I forget if that's the name. But anyway, thank you. This was a quick one. I want to get this one out. My name's Dick Lucas. Search No Gradient wherever you get your podcasts. We're on YouTube. Dick C. Lucas on Twitter, Instagram. Dick at nogradient.com. Email. Hit me up. Let me know what you want me to cover. I'm doing shorter episodes. Boom, on single topics. Just get them out. Get them done. Thanks for joining, people. Hell yeah, man.
Oh my god.